I'm really glad to be here today. I want to thank actually everybody at the Gund, but in particular Taylor Ricketts. I want to thank Janine Valcour and Noor Shahood, who just trying to keep up with me is enough to drive a person mad. And I really appreciate everything you all done to make some space for my voice here today. I'm going to share my screen because, I like to have some images here. And I'm going to try to move through this fairly quickly because really what I'm doing here is just seeding a conversation. I understand that I got to keep it to 30 minutes and there's just a lot of things I want to say, but I just want to sort of drop some things. So if they seem like incomplete thoughts, that's because they are, but hopefully we'll be able to fill in the blanks together in some kind of conversation. So when you see me look down, I'm looking at my notes because I'm trying to keep myself in line. So let me put up the first photo here. I decided I wanted to see how many times I've been having some form of this conversation since last May. And what I counted was that today is the 101st time I've had a conversation with people other than myself about race and the environment, environmental justice, DEI, power and privilege. It goes on. And actually 101, I'm underestimating. That doesn't count all the stuff I don't count. So whether I show up giving a talk, whether I'm being interviewed, whether I'm asked to write about it, whether I'm asked to consult on it, advise on it, I realize I've been having this conversation 101 times since last May. And I have to tell you, as privileged as I am and grateful as I am that I get to have this conversation, I get to have it, I get to pay my rent, I get to engage in something that I'm really passionate about, I get to do something that is really personal to me, as well as professional and political. I'm really tired. I'm really tired. I mean, the emotional labor of the thing is really wearing down on me in a very particular way. And so I just wanted to be transparent with you about that. And I'm really happy to be here. And I'm also holding that at the same time. And I imagine that there are a lot of you out there who may be holding that at the same time as well. And we can talk about that. I always put this up, Stories of Now. Oh, before I go here, Stories of Now, the other thing that I want to say is, and I've said this before, I've been thinking a lot about a conversation I had with a South Asian woman in San Francisco International Airport. It's probably been about 6 years ago now, if not longer. And we were standing in line waiting to board the plane. And she told me that she has been to 75 countries and her job, her work, is to talk to businesses about diversity issues. And she's telling me all of this, and she was kind of intimidating. She wasn't physically tall. I was taller than her, but she was very intense. And when she looked at me, she asked me, empathy and sympathy are really nice, but who do you stand with? And she kind of left it there. And she was talking to me and these two white women who were standing behind me. And I'm always thinking about that question. I'm thinking about that question right now. Not only who do I stand with, but actually, what does that entail? What does that look like? What does that look like for me? Is it about protesting on the streets? Is it about the words I use to write about it? What is it in my life that has changed that shows who I stand with? Because to stand with someone in this moment is going to cost you something. It costs everybody something. Some people have already been paying. So let's talk about George Floyd for a moment. So when I think of Stories of Now, right, I think of George Floyd's murder last summer. But boy, unfortunately, I don't even have to go back that far because now I can just think about Dwayne Wright. Or I can think about the 13-year-old boy in Chicago. I mean, all those things just happened again, right? And there's all the stories of the ones we don't see on video and social media that have been happening for the last 450 years. So here we are again, holding this moment in a very particular way, right? How do we meet this moment? And what is it going to cost us? And how prepared are we? And do we think that any of us are exempt? Right. So I'm going to let that hang there. Right. The pandemic is going on. And I know that some of us have been directly impacted by that. We've lost people that we care about. Some of us have gotten sick ourselves. After this today, I'm going to get my first vaccine. And I feel a way about that. A few people are like, you must be excited. I'm like, first of all, I'm never excited to get a needle in my arm. Two, I'm nervous about having something put in my arm that, I'm sorry, we rushed this vaccine out, and I understand that, but that makes me really nervous. I've got my own phobia around that, but I'm going to do it because it isn't only about me, right? It is also about everyone else around me. So a friend has taken me because I know I'm a grown-ass woman, but damn, I got to have somebody go with me just to get my head right to get around that. And meanwhile, we're still having this conversation about how divided we are, as though that is something new. I understand, right? That political map there is one way to draw our divisions and to recognize what they are. But I want to remind everybody that we've always been divided. We have always been divided. Divisions exist. And divisions in and of themselves, for me, are not the problem. The problem is, how do we meet those divisions? How are we still in right relationship? What does that look like? What are we willing to give up, let go of, change in order to bridge those relationships? Not make everybody like us, but just make us able to meet in a way that is humane and respectful and hopeful as we move forward together. I'm already off my notes, but okay, let's keep going. I've been showing this story lately because I like to talk a lot about representation, and I want to put this on the table. Driving While Black, which this week, this is the second time I've told this story to somebody, and I'm like, now when I put up that Driving While Black, I can't help but think of Duante Wright. But what I want to talk about here is Lovecraft Country. I want to talk about a series that's on HBO. It was on last year. It was one of my favorite. It's a sci-fi series based on the novels of H.P. Lovecraft. What's amazing to me about this series, and it started for me in the first episode, it starts in the 1950s. It's right after the Korean War. It centers on an extended African-American family who's living in Chicago. The opening episode is about this family about to go on a road trip and adventure to Massachusetts to find this probable white family who practices magic, who they're related to. And there's all this story related in there. And yes, there are monsters and gore and blood and all that stuff happens because they packed everything in here. But that isn't even the most interesting part of the story for me. It was when they were loading up the car. It is when the Black matriarch of the family stood in front of the car on this sunny day, and they're all kind of laughing, joking, feeling the anxiety the way that human beings do when they're about to go on an adventure. And she'd pull out her notebook and she's just double checking very calmly that they have everything they need in the car. Do they have their blankets, the food, the water, and everything? She's really referencing the Green Book because this is the 1950s. And yes, Black people can go on adventurous road trips like everybody else, but they can't go on those road trips like everybody else, right? It is Jim Crow segregation. They have to make sure they have everything they need in that car because they might not be able to stop at a restaurant, a park, a public bathroom in order to take a break. So they have to make sure they have everything they need, but it's almost a throwaway line. A little bit later in the episode, they're down the road. I believe they're in Massachusetts. They get pulled over by a white state trooper. It's a little bit before 7 o'clock. He comes up to them and he says, do you know where you are? And they said, yes. And they named the county. He says, do you realize that this is a sundown county? Which is a thing. It is a thing in this country that if you are Black, if you are non-white, and after sundown, if you're caught in that county, all bets are off. Anything can happen to you. And there will be no repercussions for anybody else. And so he's letting them know they have 7 minutes left. And later on, they actually encounter real monsters in the woods and fights ensue and all that kind of stuff happens. But for me, the power was in the decentering of whiteness and the recentering of another perspective of how to be out in the world, which includes non-human nature, because it always includes non-human nature. There's no way you are out in your life without being in a relationship in some way to non-human nature. And the power of having it decentered and recentered, which didn't have to diminish whiteness in order to tell the story, but it elevated Blackness, and more important, it elevated a kind of humanity of experience. So it was going to mean that some audience members were going to have to work harder as they're watching this to be like, whoa, wait, what's that notebook? Wait, I don't understand. Sundown County, I need to look that up because I don't know what that is. And the rest of us are going, oh yeah, I recognize that. I know that. I feel that. Right? There's a kind of acknowledgement, and there's something really powerful in that when that happens. I read an article in the Paris Review a few weeks ago written by a Black journalist named Muir, and it talked again about Black representation. She talked about Fran Lebowitz, the Jewish writer and thinker and public speaker, who was saying she doesn't understand why people want to be able to open a book and see themselves, because books are not supposed to be mirrors, they are doors. And Maura Cheeks sort of responded in the article saying, Fran Lebowitz doesn't know what she has because she's always represented. So maybe she doesn't have to see a book as a mirror. Later on, Fran Lebowitz is in conversation with Black writer Toni Morrison, and she brings it up again. I don't understand why people want to see themselves in books. Books are supposed to be doors, not mirrors. And she looked at Toni Morrison and said, you are not your reader. And Toni Morrison just smiled and said, well, yes, I am the reader. Right. The point being, for those of us who have never seen ourselves in any circumstance, in any story, and this includes curriculum, this includes policy, right? Not just a television show, not just a book you're reading on a Saturday afternoon, but have never seen ourselves, our point of view represented anywhere. The power of thinking of things as a door and a mirror, because it says something. When I know you can recognize me, when you can see me, it means you value me. It means I can potentially trust you. It means that we can potentially work together better towards that thing we both say that we want, right? I'm revved up now. So I always put this on convergence, but I have added Raoul Peck, the Haitian filmmaker, and if you haven't seen it, please put it on your list. The new HBO documentary, Exterminate All These Brutes, based on his friend Sven Lindqvist's a book about how Africa has basically been raped over time and colonized. One of this quote, the past is a future we never expect. Here we are, here we've always been at this moment, right? And you can see all the images I have up on there representing very briefly and inadequately complex history of this country, everything from slavery to Japanese internment to immigrants crossing the border to the abuse we have done to the landscape, the privileging of certain and elevating of certain stories about who we are and how we've been. Gifford Pinchot, who founded the idea of managing the resources for our use, John Muir and President Roosevelt, who thought about wilderness and national parks and this space, and this is who we are and how we show up. And even as they are doing this in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, all this other stuff is going on around them at the same time. And I'm always wondering, who are they talking about? Who are they talking about? How is that working, the national parks and wilderness and these ideas during Jim Crow segregation? Because if you are non-white, how does that work? How does that work if you're poor? I don't understand how that works over time. I want to talk about, if you haven't read it, the recent set of articles in The Atlantic, right? Blew my mind this week. I don't know if any of you have read it. If you haven't, I'm sure it's going to blow your mind. I want to get the title right here. The title is Return the National Parks to the Tribes. It's just as I put it, Return the National Parks to the Tribes. The article is written by a Native American man, David Truer, who basically, it's a long article. It's thoroughly researched. He makes his case. And I would say it's not made necessarily with anger. He just talks about the details of the indigenous experience on this place, very specific tribes at very specific times, in very specific ways that we understand, right? The humanity that got lost, the humanity that was at stake, why we should give all the national parks back to Native people to steward, right? And I want to ask us the question, are we ready for that? Well, and what does it take to be ready for that? I know it sounds, for some of us, it's going to sound, oh yes, let's get to it. Decolonization. It has always been about giving the land back, but wait a minute, because the country we had 450, 500 years ago when Columbus lost his way is not the country we have now. We have gotten more complicated up in this mess, right? In terms of all of us. How do we give the parks back? And what does that mean about reparations for the descendants of the enslaved? How do we give the parks back? What does it mean for all the businesses around those parks who've relied upon those parks to operate in a very particular way? What does it mean about the federal government, right? Whose actual responsibility and power is to prioritize and decide how the national parks are used? What does it mean for the public and this is something that David Thoreau talks about, the diverse public in all kinds of ways that likes to show up in different parks in different ways at all times, do they still get to do that? What does it mean for our ability to take the lead from a people that historically we have tried to erase, dismiss, and ignore for the last 450 years? What makes you think we are going to be any better at listening to them now, even if we just give the park back? And how do we deal with the resistance? Because we are dealing with resistance all the time. Have you noticed? I know you have, right? Especially these last couple of years, the pushback is hard. The fear is hard. And do you think if we make this decision that there isn't going to be some serious, dangerous pushback? How do we get ready for that? What does that look like? What is it going to cost us? What does it demand of us to do? Because understand this, right? The College of Natural Resources, the Rubenstein School, every institution, every environmental nonprofit in this country is invested in this question in a very particular way. You have to be invested, right? Because it's about the national parks. It's about biology and wilderness and conservation and interpretation. And one of the jobs of those of us privileged to be in institutions like the one at Rubenstein, to do the work that we do, that many of us love to do, is, dare I say, it is in part to support that status quo as well as to push back on that status quo. It is a hard tension we often stand in. We promote and create curriculum. We promote and create knowledge about how we're supposed to be and who we're supposed to be and who is the we that is supposed to be. We do it all the time. How does that change the way we do that now if we return everything? So I found out the other day, and I guess this is from 2017, it's a photographer named Chris Buck. And Chris Buck, for O Magazine, Oprah's magazine, created a series of photographs called Let's Talk About Race, where he basically flipped the script on race. The idea, to stimulate conversation. So this is one of his images out there. I mean, you can see it. It kind of speaks for itself. It's a young white girl who's looking in a toy store and she's looking up at a couple of shelves of dolls, but all the dolls are black and brown. I have never seen that before in my life, except in this photograph. And what does that bring up for us? What does that bring up for you? Beyond it being an exercise, beyond it being a piece of art, what if it was really like that? What if we really flipped the script? Could we really flip the script? Do we want to flip the script? What would it entail to flip the script? He did it also with women of Asian descent. I found the statistic today. There were approximately 3,800 anti-Asian racist incidents since last year, and most of them were against women. Just take in the image. What would it mean and what would it take to flip the script? And I know it's never that simple, but I think we have to be asking ourselves those questions, particularly those of us to be privileged to be in institutions like this one, as well as the one that I'm in, as well as pretty much any of the other institutions I've been talking to in the last year, right? What does it mean at this moment for us to address it? Because we are never, ever just addressing what we think we're addressing. Whatever it is that you study, you do so in a web of connections. You do so, it doesn't mean you don't work hard. It doesn't mean that you're not a good person. And it doesn't mean that you don't care. But if you think that you are there just doing what you're doing with no impact going either way, I want to say this gently, but I got to say it hard because I'm tired, right? That you are not. And that is a privilege. Your silence is a privilege. Your unwillingness to engage is a privilege. Your choice not to engage it is a privilege. And I understand how hard it is, because it is hard. It is hard for everybody. But again, I will say, no one is exempt. No one is exempt from this moment. I didn't even get to the baby in the bathwater. So this was 2014. 2014, I was at, I think it was the University of Oregon or Oregon State. I was on a panel with Rob Nixon and a Latinx activist from Texas named Susana Almanza. She's the executive director of People Organized in Defense of Earth and her resources. And my book had just come out, so I got up and did a little thing about that and what I was doing. Rob Nixon got up and gave a great talk about his work on slow environment. I forgot what it's called. He got up and did a talk on his work, and then Susana Almanza got up. And the quote that I wrote down of hers that I want to share with you is that she said, in terms of collaborating with those who work in academia, because people asked her about that. She was the one person up there that didn't see themselves in academia. And she said, she suggested that we need to take off our shoes and remember what it's like to get dirty. And she said it really gently, but I thought it was really powerful. So it raises the question for me in academia, really, what does that look like? What does it mean for us to get dirty? None of us are exempt from this moment. And I'm not saying that like I don't realize that some of you already know that, but I just feel like I got to say it for myself as well as for everybody else. No one gets off the hook right now. You can choose to ignore it, but you're still not off the hook for it. So what is it that we have to do, and what does that entail? I've been saying a lot lately that you don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater with respect to all the work, the time, the history, the blood, sweat, and tears that many of us have put in to do the work that we do, to create, to sustain the institution and the way we think about nature and the environment and natural resources, all the work we've done to do that. I'm not necessarily saying we have to throw the baby in the bathwater out, but I am definitely saying unequivocally that we need a new bathtub. If you think you can have your cake and eat it too, you cannot. I've decided you cannot, right? Because there's so many people who cannot, who have never been able to have their cake and eat it too. Ask the Native people. Have they ever been able to have their cake and eat it too? Ask the Black people. Ask the Japanese people. Ask the Chinese people. Ask the Mexican people. Ask the people of Middle Eastern descent. Ask anybody who's ever been seen as different and ostracized as such in this country if they've ever been able to have their cake and eat it too. They have not. So we need to get rid of the bathtub. Part of that getting rid of the bathtub might be giving the national parks back to Native people to steward. Oh boy, and that in and of itself, even if we did nothing else, that's going to take everything that we've got to figure out how to do that so that we are all supported. It's not about having this hierarchy or suddenly a seesaw where more people are getting what they want on this side and other people aren't. That's just what we've been doing for the last 450 years. We just have to come up with another model of what those relationships can look like so we can meet this moment. I put up this slide. I realized that my notes and my slides weren't in order because what I want to talk about here is how tired, and throw this on the table, how tired I am of cancel culture. How many times I got about 3 minutes. Okay, cancel culture. I like to get rid of it. I like to cancel culture because I think it's actually, and I say this really gently, I think it's kind of lazy. I think it's kind of, I understand the impulse because accountability, yes, I'm all about it. People need to be held accountable. When I think what happened to Christian Cooper, how he had his skin weaponized him when he walked into Central Park by the white woman, Amy Cooper. Yes, Amy Cooper needs to be held accountable, but you know something? The conversation I want to have is not with Christian Cooper. I'd love to meet Christian Cooper. Maybe we will someday. I'm all about what happened to Christian Cooper. I'm with him. I've had my own experience. I can relate. I understand. But the conversation I want to have is with Amy Cooper. Because you know, Amy Cooper paid the price for like all white people. She lost a job. She lost everything. But I want to know what's happened with Amy Cooper, because that could be turned into real change. And I think that Amy Cooper would be way more powerful in front of a room of predominantly white folks than me to have this conversation, because she could talk about it from experience. She could talk about what it meant to move through that ostracizing experience of losing pretty much everything, of having been forced to self-re-examine. I'm hoping that's where she went, that she didn't go back down some sad road of depression and suicidal thought. I hope she didn't go there as a fellow human being. I hope she was supported to think about her growth while she's being held accountable. I hope she's supported and brought back into the fold, because if everybody who's ever done anything considered racist, biased, whatever you want to call it, was canceled. We pretty much almost have nobody left, right? And so I'm just saying, how do we come up with a different model? And what does that look like? The other thing I want to remind everybody, just really quickly, there's an $887 billion outdoor recreation industry that's counting on us. It's counting on us to maintain, baby, because they have a narrative that they have to maintain in order to make the money they need to make. And I work with a lot of people in this industry. A lot of good people are trying to change it up and do it. And it's really hard to change it up and do it when you're reliant upon this status quo that operates. It relies upon the knowledge we continue to put out there. And narratives we continue to put out there about this is what nature looks like and this is how we should be and this is what we need to support. Woo, there's a symbiotic relationship going on all the time. $887 billion, right? So that counts for something. The last thing that I want to say, and then I got to stop talking, is because I know I just said a lot of hard stuff, like I'm not feeling positive. I'm just feeling kind of tired and a little frustrated and many things this week, and sad as well. Is that I think that there's real possibility, right? I'm not going to tell the story of my parents and my family, which is the one I usually do, but I do want to say this little piece of it because in this moment, I'm working with a couple of different institutions around how things can shift, and institutions and individuals can make different choices. There's a story that when my family used to live on the estate for my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, my father gave my mother standing right behind him, the weeping cherry tree for their 40th wedding anniversary. But when they left the property nearly 10 years later, they obviously couldn't take the tree with them. And so in recent times, the New York Botanical Gardens reached out to me as an institution to do some work with them. I told them this story. They said, I told them how my parents' story of labor on that land has been lost in the larger history of that land, particularly because there's a land trust, that's been placed, a conservation easement on here, and the land trust hasn't mentioned anything about their work or their labor. They said, we can do something about that. Let's get on the property. Let's get a piece of that cherry blossom tree. We're the New York Botanical Gardens. We can do that as an institution. We can tell the story. Deeply moved by this possibility. Then a Emmy Award-winning filmmaker reached out to me and said, I'm doing a documentary for HBO on trees, but I remember you spoke about this and I don't have anything in here, any stories about Black people. Can you tell me a story? I told her this story. She wants to make this story part of her documentary, which it is now, right? A story that she's going to tell. So she's using her as a white film director, right? She's going to make this one of her stories. Finally, the Conservation Land Trust we reached out to them because all of this takes time and relationship building over the last 6 months. But if there was ever time to do it, it is now. There's brand new owners on this property. And at this moment, we've got everybody on board and interested in engaging. And I understand that for some of them, it's because they have their own thing that they want to do. I don't actually have a problem with their agenda because, if we can kind of pull our agendas together for a larger intention in terms of that we want to serve, I believe we can do it. But I showed the land trust this picture. You can see there's the weeping cherry tree again next to this hydrangea bush. It's in a springtime, summertime photo so that they would know how to look for it because they didn't know back in December. They just wanted to make sure the tree was still there. End of December, this is the photo he sent me. It's been landscaped by the new owners. Now, I want to tell you, angry, heartbroken, it took me 2 days it was a gut punch because it just looks like it's been landscaped by owners who had no idea that was the only memory of my parents and my family on that land as having been part of that landscape. The thing about accountability is, and this is where I want to get to, right now it's getting everybody on board, each institution that has that power, that privilege, and the owners who also have the money, right, to buy this property. It's millions of dollars, right? And they've just opened their door just to crack to say they're interested in having a conversation because we want access to the estate. And ultimately, what I would like to do is replant the tree with everybody accountable and responsible to the story. It isn't just about me and my family. Actually, it is about all of us and how we show up in this moment. And finally, understanding that we are always playing the long game here, right? I've said it over and over. There is no end game, right? You have to be willing to take risks in order to gain. This is not about being comfortable. There's nothing comfortable about anything here that I'm talking about, but it's never about being comfortable, which isn't the same as feeling safe. Right. I put up this picture by Robert S. Duncanson because during the inauguration, when I saw that this was the gift to Joe Biden from Senator Roy Blount, I'd never heard of this painter. He's a Black painter who painted a picture of a landscape in 1859 with a rainbow. And my mind was blown when I heard he was Black, because I was like, how does somebody who inhabits a Black body in 1859, when Black bodies were being enslaved as other people's property, manage to feel potential and possibility at a time when I read that he was suffering from mental illness, in part because of what was going on? I can't imagine how he was ducking and weaving at that time, right? But this is for me, I imagine he was playing the long game, because literally 100 years before my birth, he painted this as a possibility. Not that he would necessarily ever get to see it in his lifetime, but he understood that it was possible for him to dream and imagine what might come after him. So the last thing I want to end is with a quote by Henry Aaron, the baseball player, who said, "My motto was to always keep swinging, whether I was in a slump or feeling badly or having trouble off the field. The only thing to do was to keep swinging." We got to keep swinging. That's really it. I know it's hard, and again, no one is exempt. It's going to cost everybody something, which is going to make it even harder. It's going to cost me something, but I've decided that you're worth it. So I'll stop there. Oh, justice is love made public. I love, because at the end, it's all about love, people. For me, it is. Really, who do you ride or die with? Who do you stand with? Who are you willing to give it up for? Really, at the bottom, at the foundation, it is actually about love. Love of place, love of people. And how do we attend to that?
Thank you, Carolyn, so much. It's always incredibly moving, and learn so much more every time I hear you speak. So we'll switch gears to the Q&A session. As folks are typing in their questions into the Q&A box, I was hoping to start off with a question extracting, in a sense, of like 3 particular points from what you had just shared with us. And one was about the tensions that you mentioned between like within spaces like the Rubenstein School, like the Gund Institute, that are trying to move towards like real transformation and also quite invested in the status quo. That juxtaposed with the resistance you name, like the major pushback resistance to change the status quo, like just not even philosophically agreeing that the status quo needs to change. Like, I just thought it was very interesting. Like, how do you think about the relationship between that tension and that pushback, as related to what you also mentioned about new models for relationships, what that might look like, where everyone feels supported? 100% of people is what I understood you were saying, and of course non-human beings in nature, and so that love that you closed with can be felt and experienced and exchanged and reciprocated between everyone.
So if I understood, Nina, that was a big question. That is talking about the tensions, how to address the tensions, the tensions between both, maintaining the status quo and trying to make change within the institution.
Right.
Also,
so that tension, the tension between that type of tension and the major resistance to shifting the status quo at all. Like people who are still consciously racist, people who are still not understanding the erasure and the crimes against Native Americans. That kind of thing.
I'm going to say that I don't think those tensions are all that different. What I mean by that is, wherever we go, there we are. So, I don't see I don't disassociate the resistance, what I heard you describe out in the world, as something different that goes on within any institution. I actually think they're mirrors in many ways. I believe they show up differently, and there can be more thoughtfulness. There's a way within which the resistance outside, in my opinion, can kind of broad brush everybody, and who those people are resistant. How we can define, people based on what they look like or where they live, or verbiage that they've spouted, that we see out there in clips, right? But the idea that there's a fear that's real because people are worried about losing a sense of themselves and who they are. The idea that it's asking everybody to do some degree of self-examination and reckoning with how they got what they got and where they are. That's true. I'm sorry, whether you're outside the institution or inside the institution. That's the truth. It doesn't mean everybody agrees with it. It doesn't mean everybody's going to do it. But for me, that's part of the resistance. And the part of me that empathizes with it as a human being is how hard that is. It's not like I don't have to do it to some degree. I may not have to do it to the same degree as a white person for a variety of reasons, but I have to do it. It's a challenging thing for me to think about reparations versus colonization, decolonization. In the broadest sense, it's hard for me to think about, what's my role in supporting, the give back to the parks? What do I have to do? What do I have to redress? What do I owe? No matter how much I may have quote unquote suffered or experienced as a Black person in the United States, right? It is not about how much suffering one has experienced, right? Doesn't determine if you are exempt. Not in and of itself. Not if we're saying we want something really different. I think that, there's many ways that most of us, if not all of us, are complicit because we're forced to be. We live in a system, we live in a capitalist system that controls our lives in very particular, informs, let me take the control off, informs our lives in many, many different ways. I know I make choices. And sometimes I'm not happy with the choices that I have, but that's the choices, that I have, or that's what I think anyway, and I make. So I think part of it is letting go of the separation, them out there, us in here, which just reinforces this kind of them out there, us in here, as though we're not all connected, number one. Number two, as a geographer, I think a lot in scale. So sometimes that helps. For me, I can see it that way. It's like the scale of an individual, a community, an institution, a state, a national, an international. I mean, there's different ways to frame it so that relationship is understood differently. But often what's going on out there is just distant from a lot of us in some ways. Not all of us. Some of us, we may be deeply involved in it in many different ways and impacted by that. But I think operating like one is separate from the other is actually dangerous. And I don't think it's incredibly honest, nor do I think it's necessarily brave. And I think all those things, and I say this to me as well as I say it to you and anyone else, I'm not exempt either, right? This is one of the reasons I'm so tired and frustrated and anxiety ridden this week, among other things, around these kinds of conversations. Because I start to think, what am I doing? What am I doing? Like, is there something else I can be doing? What do I have to keep doing over? What am I good at? What am I not good at? How do I continue to self-educate? What do I have to be willing to make space for? And who do I have to be willing to make space for? What do I let go of? When people ask me in, I'm so grateful to come do it because it means I can pay my rent. It means that I have some sense of my identity and my meaning in my life. And I've managed to line it up. And that's really powerful. And that's great. But is that enough? Like, what is that? Like, what else do I have to be doing? Because there's always more. So, institutions, I think we are in powerful places in some ways because we already have a pre-subscribed community in place. I know that everybody doesn't always get along. I know that everybody doesn't always agree, but there's an agreement, I think, that's all often unspoken about. We all get to be in an institution and spend time thinking about and talking about and writing about and working for and working towards some certain set of ideas, even if we don't fully agree on them. We get to stretch our limbs in a very particular way. A small percentage of the world gets to do that. We are, for me, part of the potential of change, even though many would argue, and I wouldn't disagree with them, that academic institutions are like not at the front of the line anymore when it comes to change and innovation. In part, I feel, you may not agree with me, because of that tension you're talking about. Because the status quo of the institution, how do you maintain, I don't know how old UVM is or Rubenstein School is, but the idea of any institution, many that have been around for 50, 100, 150 years, and also do something new, knowing that when that institution was created, all that other stuff I was talking about was going on, like full-fledged, which means it was created in that moment, which again, you don't have to throw it all out. But man, you definitely need to do some self-examination. That definitely needs to happen. So what does that look like? How are people supported? How do you get people to come to the table who feel like they don't have to, who feel like they don't want to, who feel like they can't, who feel afraid, who can't hear you, who, I don't know, fill in the blanks, ... Again, I feel like it's going to cost everybody something. It's already cost some people a lot. And I'm tired of anybody else dying, either literally or metaphorically, right? In spaces. So you can talk about Duante Wright, but we can also talk about the many people who die every day in the classroom, whose stories aren't in the books, whose voices aren't heard, the people who don't get promoted, the people who don't get seen, the students who don't get seen, over and over and over again. You know what? You don't even have to look outside at the world. Just look at exactly where you are and decide, what is it going to cost to change it? And what am I willing and able to do? I don't want to go get my shot, everybody. I just don't want to do it, but I'm going to do it. I'm just saying.
We're like in the large phase 3 trial as a society, as the world. Thank you so much, as always, so powerful. The last section of what you were just sharing ties into at least one question that I said earlier. There's a lot of questions coming in, all of them open with such deep gratitude for your presence here and everything that you're sharing with us. And one of the questions is is kind of where you left off just now, is, do you think it's possible to decolonize academia?
Yes. You know why? It's like, what? Because I know I just saw all of that, and I know I started off by saying I'm tired, and I meant all of it. And I am entirely optimistic. I'm entirely optimistic about humanity. When I was privileged to be asked by those of you at Rubenstein a few years ago to give the graduate address, and one of the things I said is, like, I had to look back on the 100 years and also a lot of the amazing things we've done as human beings. We've, all the awful things we've done. What's amazing is also all the amazing things we've done. Like, we continue to do amazing while we continue to do awful. We're something else, man. We are complicated. We are complicated, right? And so what I am optimistic about, what I believe in, is the potential for us to make better choices. I believe in all the things that we can discover and create and determine. Do I believe we can do it easily? Absolutely not. Do I believe we can do it free of charge? Absolutely not. We've never been able to do any of those things that really have moved us and addressed our common humanity in that way, free of charge. I was about to say anything worth having, it's going to cost something, right? So yes, I completely believe. I think, academia in its best sense for me is an experiment. It is an experiment in how human beings think and show up in the world. It is an experiment about bringing together all kinds of ideas and not knowing what you don't know and going there anyway. It is an experiment. It is the best kind of experiment And it is entirely frustrating for me that I had to walk away from it in order to retain who I am, to then again be in relationship with it. Because I wouldn't do it if I didn't believe in it at all. I believe, like at its core, the idea of thinking of democracy in the broadest sense, of everybody, really the potential for change is out there in so many different ways. My frustration is with the forgetting of what it is. My frustration is with the business of it. My frustration is with the language of it that doesn't give itself room to breathe, that doesn't allow for being uncomfortable and unsure as a strength, as spaciousness, that's why I'm frustrated, but I believe, I believe it can change.
Okay, thank you. Oh my gosh, there's so many amazing questions. How are you feeling? Are you up for more?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure
You've got another 10 minutes or so.
Okay, yes, that's true. Oh my gosh. This one is back to the interesting way, in a sense, you want to flip the script with Amy Cooper and the cancel culture. And here's a question that in situations like that one, what do you think about, like, how do we allow white people, white privileged people, those who would be canceled, to share their experience and growth while still not centering their experience over others and neglecting the harm that they have stimulated for potential people who have been on the receiving end of their behavior?
Yes, I think that's an excellent question. For me, that's the kind of constructive, creative question I like engaging with. I don't have a full answer to it. I think that there are, the first thing that popped into my head is to look at countries and communities that have done things like Truth and Reconciliation, that have and are addressing trauma, in its myriad of forms, and finding out what is that. So how do we start from there? How do we get a group of concerned folks together to say, how do we do that? We start small. Maybe the first is not having, what does it mean to have a conversation with people like Amy Cooper, and not necessarily with 1,000 people in the room, like coming from all different forms of that experience, because we're not ready. But just by having a conversation about what that space would look like, maybe that's the conversation. What would that space look like? And start to get ideas about what that space might look like. How would it be co-facilitated, co-visioned? Would it be different in different states, in different communities, and at different times? Would it be different based on who came together to co-vision and co-create it? That, for me, that's how I answer it. Let's do that. And we don't have to start having the conversation yet. Then we decide collectively how we are ready, how we move forward.
The flip the script piece has really resonated. There are a few questions on that theme. This one is about what might be some tangible examples that currently feel resonant with your wise call to flip the script and co-create a new bathtub. And the example here is in the context of the equitable world that is everyone's birthright.
Yeah. Well, the one that comes to mind in part because I serve on the board of the Guild, the Sustainability Guild, which is based in Boston. It was started by a Black woman, Jana Sexian, who was working on her doctorate at Harvard, and she left it to start this in the Black community there. And if you don't know the guild, you should look up the guild, everything, the money they've got, they're creating, they've already got the building, the center, the idea that it's for the community. It's everything from the architects involved are all Black to the different ways the community is involved. The idea that the time it took and still to negotiate the last few years with, political entities within the community, others who wanted, ooh, this looks good, I want to get in there, and saying no, because what they wanted didn't align with the intention. What it means to take time and vision differently, what it means to flip the script, and it's actually the community and the values are actually quite different in terms of how they are privileged, right? Not so much the privilege of time or we've got to get this done in this way, but it's the idea that there's something here that we're trying to do. And so we're going to have to take our time and do it differently. For me, that's the first and only, actually, a thing I can think of that's actively, that has an environmental component that is in the process at the moment. Even the way we have board meetings is often different than other boards that I sit on, which doesn't mean you don't take care of board business and there isn't a structure there. But we are acutely aware of the way within which we don't want to recreate certain types of power dynamics, certain ways in which decision-making is made to impact those we say we care about, and that we have to actually challenge all of those things, which means it takes longer and it takes more work, right? But I think it's possible to do that, to flip the script. I think there are people, okay, I lied. I think there are actually a lot of people since last summer that are trying. I think there are a lot of publications. I think that there are, because that's one of the reasons I'm so busy, actually. I just realized that, because people are saying, oh my God, we need to get somebody Black, brown, different up in here, being the one. Everything from big time literary agents to small time, organizations that want their board to look different. I mean, it's just, there are people that are really getting that they have to do it differently. Some of us might say that it's signaling some type of virtuosity, and I'm not saying that that's not happening. But I'm also seeing people genuinely wanting to do something different and trying to think about what that is and how they might do things differently. And so that's a question I'd love to revisit in about 3 years, because let's see where we get to, with everything that's happening now and what's about to happen next in terms of how we move forward in this moment. Yeah, ask me again in 3 years, or ask me again in a year.
Yeah, we'll track it, it's data collection.
Yeah.
So I think if it's okay, we'll take one more question.
Yeah, that sounds good.
And I think it might tie some things together. I'm kind of seeing it as like a continuing fractalization of this flipping the script motif. And so this question is, what is the model of supporting the oppressor class and race to grow look like? Why does the heavy work seem to fall to those who are on the marginalized, like end of that binary? Should we flip the script at UVM and support the privilege to lead the change? Does this just further privilege and status privilege and white privilege?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, I have a couple of different answers. I mean, first, I'm thinking that I'd actually like to change the framing. I think part of the framing, I know I flipping the script in part was my way to be flip about how to consider a different perspective, right? But in terms of operationalizing that into some type of practice, I actually feel like we have to change the framing so that it is not, there's not one is privileged and another is privileged, and there's a kind of seesaw and all that inequality that happens because of that. And I like the idea of a web of relationships instead. That allows each relationship not to assume it's going to be the way it's going to be, because we're talking about, just for example, a white privileged individual and a non-white, not as privileged as much individual, right? Like that's how that's framed. Because I understand, if I believe in, which I do, intersectionality, if I believe in fluidity, if I believe in nothing is static, and that I believe in people can change, I want to make sure there's spaciousness in there. And there's something about that emergence. I always talk about that too, that what's the third space that gets created when two people who are very different come together to do that. I don't disagree with the question that often, at least at the moment, it seems like it is brown and black and poor, and that there's a lot of weight, right? In part because the weight's been there for the last 500 years. In part, also, and this is what I will say for myself, not speaking for anybody else, right? But for myself, is that what I realize is that, man, it has been like I've got triple PhDs in what it means to be in this body in this country, which means there's a lot that I know about it without ever having to go to school. And that I've had time to really think, reflect, show up, experience it in its many different capacities, right? I can actually look at a movie, a show, read an article about anybody who doesn't look like me and find a way to relate. Because you know why? I've been spending 61 years figuring that out. I've had practice. I'm good at it. So yeah, you better call on me, because guess what? I got something to say after 61 years. So for me, it's flipping the script about how I understand that, less as weight on my shoulders, which doesn't mean I don't feel that way, because it's part of the reason why I'm tired, right? So it's complicated. I'm almost contradicting myself, and this is the challenge. But I also, in my better moments, it's a superpower, really, because you're not gonna fool me. Like, no. I see what that is. Let me just slide on up in here and say this instead, right? So for me, it's about agency. And how do I support and my own as well as other people's agency? How do I build and support self-care into the model so that there's room for those who've been carrying it for so long to set it down and be supported? Because that is also part of the work, right? It is not like the only time we're doing the work is when it's really hard. It's actually all the time is the work. Change is the work, right? Which means, how do we care for each other? What is our ability to notice when somebody is really dragging? And I can say, without them feeling bad about it, you're dragging. What can I do? How can I pick that up? How can I support you in that? I don't want to cry. There's a person from UVM, the person who offered to take me to get my injection today. We're really good friends, and I didn't need anybody to take me. And she was really she just knew how I would feel about it. She knew that I was tired. She didn't say any of that. She was like, I want to take you. We're going to go. Blah, 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 blah. And I could have gone myself and driven myself. And I said, no, I really want. That's really great. And it's like, it seems like it's such a small gesture, but it is a grand one, because at the core of that is really about love and a recognition, without me having to always ask for it. And I'd love that for anybody else. And I want to improve my ability to see that in anybody else. That's how I feel we can show up differently in relationship, recognizing self-care, being able to notice when someone else needs it. It's not always about doing the heavy lifting. Sometimes it's just about opening up our heart and making space and time and picking up a thing, even though we may not want to pick it up today, but we want to give so-and-so a break. So, and in the picking it up today, we learn something and we get better at it. I always get so emotional. What is up with me? Okay. Yes.
There's nothing wrong with emotion. I think that's a huge part of the pathway towards, I think, a shared common vision that folks on this call have. And thank you so much, Carolyn. My gosh, yeah, I'm always emotional during, after, even thinking about listening to you. Oh my gosh. Thank you again. There's a lot of blessings for your rest and recharge, and blessings on getting your shot, and a lot of gratitude. There's notes of standing ovation for you and your presence with us here today. Okay, I'm gonna try to shift gears to the logistics, the closing logistics portion of the program. Let's see. Okay. Again, thank you everyone for coming to join us on this Friday afternoon. And on behalf of the Gund Institute, I would like to thank Dr. Carolyn Finney and everyone who joined us online. We will have the video and the podcast of today's talk available next week. Please join us again next Friday for our next Gund Exchange with Dion Ferris from the Institute for Sustainable Communities, whose talk is titled, Let's Talk About Race, Equity, Climate Adaptation, and Driving Community Resilience. And it will be on April 23rd. Thank you so much, everyone, and see you then. And Carolyn, I'm not sure if you can see the chat. There's messages coming in for you as well. And
oh, thank you.
For those folks who asked amazing questions, our apologies that we can't get to all of them.